All right, let's dive right in. I want to start with a question. How do you win a war without ever fighting a battle? It's a question that has literally shaped our world for thousands of years. And the answer? Well, it lies in a powerful, often invisible force, the art of diplomacy. Today we're going to unpack how this ancient practice has changed over time and why in our crazy interconnected world it's more critical than ever.
This isn't just some riddle. It's the fundamental challenge of international relations. And the solution is a force that's been building and breaking empires for millennia, usually working its magic far, far away from any battlefield. So, at its absolute core, diplomacy is the main tool of foreign policy. It's the structured, really strategic game of negotiation and communication between nations. And it's all designed to influence events and protect a country's interests without having to resort to force. Think of it as the art of getting what you want through persuasion, not just raw power.
To really, truly get what diplomacy is all about, we need to go back, way back. See, for most of human history, international relations wasn't about these abstract things called states. It was an intensely personal affair.
That's right, I'm not kidding, a family affair. Before we had the modern idea of a nation-state, the world was run by kings and pharaohs and emperors. And when they dealt with each other, they didn't see flags or borders. They saw rivals, allies, and, believe it or not, a whole lot of relatives.
And this whole family model was surprisingly official. In the ancient Near East, kings literally used the language of family to define their power dynamics. Rulers with equal clout like, say, the Pharaoh of Egypt and the King of the Hittites would call each other brother in their letters. A really powerful king, he was a father to his less powerful vassals, who were called his sons. And this wasn't just some nice turn of phrase. It set up a really clear hierarchy of loyalty and respect. But it also meant that a tiny personal insult between brothers could blow up into a massive international crisis.
So this very personal kind of diplomacy had a pretty standard playbook. First up, exchanging messengers. These were super trusted envoys who would carry letters and hammer out deals for their king. Second, giving awesome gifts. This was a huge deal, a really complex system of gift and countergift that was all about prestige. We've actually found ancient letters where one king is complaining that his brother sent him a cheap gift. And third, the big one, arranging royal marriages. Marrying off your daughter to a rival king, that was the ultimate way to lock in an alliance.
But this personal, family-based system, well, it couldn't last forever. A series of totally catastrophic events would force Europe to invent a whole new way of thinking about the world, and about diplomacy itself.
So yeah, diplomacy is ancient, but the real turning point for the world we live in now came in 1648, with something called the Peace of Westphalia. This treaty is basically the birth certificate of the modern sovereign state. And you can only really understand how important it was by looking at the absolute horror that came right before it.
Just let that sink in for a second. A third of the population, gone. The 30 Years' War was one of the most destructive conflicts in human history. It was this brutal mix of religious and political fighting that just tore the continent apart. After 30 straight years of slaughter, everyone was desperate for a new system, anything that could stop this from ever happening again.
And the Peace of Westphalia delivered just that. It kicked off the modern state system, and it completely changed the game for diplomacy. The huge shift was from personal relationships to impersonal ones. It wasn't about brother kings anymore, it was about sovereign states looking out for their national interests. The key players weren't temporary messengers anymore, but professional ambassadors working out of permanent embassies.
Okay, so with this new system of professional diplomats and permanent embassies, a new problem popped up. If your representatives are living full-time in another country, how do you keep them safe? The world needed a universal set of rules.
Think about it. For a diplomat to do their job, to negotiate, to report back honestly, and sometimes deliver really bad news, they have to be able to work without being afraid that the host country is going to arrest them or harass them. That meant everyone needed to agree on a global set of rules. And that agreement finally came in 1961, with the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. This treaty is the absolute bedrock of modern diplomacy. It took thousands of years of customs and traditions and put them all into a single official rulebook that pretty much everyone recognizes.
So these rules provide some really crucial protections. An embassy, for example, is considered inviolable. That means the host country's police can't just barge in without permission. A diplomat's files and communications, including the famous diplomatic bag, can't be seized. And, most importantly, diplomats get personal immunity from being prosecuted in the host country. This lets them do their job without fear of being bullied or blackmailed.
But what happens if a diplomat abuses all this immunity? Is there any way to hold them accountable? You bet. There's a really powerful tool called persona non grata. It's Latin for unwanted person. And at any time, for any reason at all, a host country can declare a diplomat persona non grata. Their home country then has to call them back home, or they lose their immunity. It's the ultimate safety valve built right into the system.
So that brings us to the modern era. How does all this work in the 21st century? And how does diplomacy fit into a nation's bigger foreign policy strategy?
A lot of strategists talk about foreign policy using what they call the 3Ds model. It's best to think of it like a three-legged stool. You've got defense, which is your military might. You've got diplomacy, which is your power to talk and negotiate. And you've got development, your power to help other nations grow through foreign aid and other programs. For a country to be stable and effective on the world stage, you need all three legs to be strong.
But in the real world, that stool is often pretty wobbly. In the United States, for instance, national security spending is just massively tilted towards defense. Diplomacy and development get only a tiny fraction of the funding. And a lot of foreign policy experts argue that this creates a huge imbalance in the country's strategic toolkit.
And that brings us to this incredibly powerful quote from former Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis. His point is crystal clear. Investing in things like diplomacy and development isn't just soft power. It's a strategic necessity. It can actually prevent conflicts from ever starting, which ultimately means you need less military force and less ammunition.
So what is a modern diplomat actually doing all day? Well, their job is incredibly broad and absolutely vital. These are the people on the front lines, negotiating massive trade deals that affect the entire global economy, or hammering out the tiny details of climate change agreements that impact the future of our planet. They're working behind the scenes to stop the spread of nuclear weapons, building complicated alliances to fight things like terrorism, and coordinating global responses to pandemics. It is high-stakes, challenging work that shapes the world we all live in.
So, from personal family squabbles to a complex global system, diplomacy has always been evolving to meet the challenges of the day. But now, in a world of social media, powerful groups that aren't even countries, and instant global communication, the traditional state-to-state model is facing its biggest test yet. So what's the future of this ancient art? Well, that's a question today's diplomats are trying to answer every single day.